Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we begin today with the second part of the conference, jointly organized by Klaipėda University, Lithuanian Institute of History, and the University of Cambridge. This part is has a slightly different thematic focus than the first part we had in Vilnius on Thursday, and today we will discuss how regions such as the territory of Memel emerged on the political map of Europe after the First World War and what lasting impact their emergence had on the identity of the inhabitants of these regions. The conference program is still available online. You will find the web address here at the top of the slide, so please use it if you want. The conference is divided into 3 sessions today. The first 2 sessions before lunch will be moderated by my colleague Vygantas Vareikis. He is a professor at Klaipėda University who was one of the first to reveal to the Lithuanian public more than 30 years ago what was really happening here 100 years ago, so behind the scenes, so to say, of Lithuanian annexation of Klaipėda. And the last session will be moderated by Donatas Kupčiūnas, whom you already know from his presentation on Thursday in Vilnius. Now, before we move to the conference presentations, I would like to ask the representatives of the conference organizers and partners who did not have the opportunity on Thursday to say a few words. So first of all, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Sonata Mačiulskytė. She is a Vice Rector for Academic Affairs of Klaipėda University. I know that she would very much like to welcome you on behalf of Klaipėda University and its rector, who is unfortunately in South Korea now at the moment, so please.
Good morning, everybody. It's really nice to welcome you here. Founded in 1991, Klaipėda University has focused on regional history since its beginnings. The Center for Western Lithuanian and Prussian History, renamed the Institute of Baltic Region History and Archaeology in 2003, is known in Lithuania and beyond as producer of interesting debates, important publications, and international conferences. Together with partners in Germany, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and other countries, the historians and archaeologists of Klaipėda University strive to draw the attention of the national audience to the still little-known coastal region of Lithuania, of which the historical region of Klaipėda is an important part, and to convey to the international audience how the past of the southeastern Baltic Sea region can be of interest to them. Over the centuries, the interests of the Hanseatic League, Prussia, Poland, Sweden, Russia, and later Great Britain and Germany have intervened there. The history of the region between the Vestula and the Daugava, which is the focus of the researchers at Klaipėda University, is therefore an excellent topic for international exchange and cooperation. Klaipėda University is pleased that the 100th anniversary of the annexation of part of this vast region, the territory of Klaipėda or Memel, to Lithuania makes it possible today to talk not only about national history, but also about regional one. Comparisons are always important in science because they allow us to see what we are studying in a broader context. We appreciate very much that our partners share our willingness to talk about it in such a context. The Center for Geopolitics at the University of Cambridge, the Lithuanian Institute of History, the Martynas Mažvydas National Library of Lithuania, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For us, this is a signal that the research topics we develop at Klaipėda University is focal and relevant. For us, it is also very important that despite Brexit, the focus on the history of the Baltic Sea in the UK continues to be activated. The Center for Geopolitics at the University of Cambridge is doing very remarkable work in this regard, and Klaipėda University is pleased to be able to make at least a modest contribution through its participation in the Baltic Geopolitics Network. Klaipėda University is primarily active in marine and coastal research, and it is a member of EU Connexus, an alliance of European universities specializing in the sustainable development of smart urban coastal areas. Research in the Baltic Sea and its coasts is therefore a strength of the university. Marine and maritime studies are inconceivable without research into social impact and history. This is why the history of the coastal region is important to us. However, we can learn more about it if we not only compare it with other coastal regions, such as Gdansk and Schleswig, which are also the subject of this conference. As the conference program shows, comparisons with other regions are also possible, and this comparison should likely produce answers that are relevant not only for us, but also for a wider European audience. On behalf of the Rector of Klaipėda University, I would like to welcome all participants to the conference, to our premises. I wish you interesting discussions this Saturday. I'm particularly pleased that the entire conference will be filmed. This will give your presentations greater lasting value. I would also like to thank the sponsors who have helped to make this possible: the Municipality of Klaipėda, the Research Council of Lithuania, and the Ministry of Culture. I wish you a wonderful Saturday in Klaipėda.
Thank you very much. No conference takes place indeed without sponsors. So the main sponsor of this conference is, among others, the Klaipėda City Municipality. Today we have a visit from Asta Anilionė-Lipovec, advisor to the mayor of the city of Klaipėda, who would like to congratulate you as well on behalf of the city of Klaipėda. Please, Asta.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I had also a speech written by your colleague, but it's very long and I cannot do such long speeches, especially in English, so mine will be shorter. As our colleague mentioned, my name is Asta Anilionė-Lipovec. I'm the advisor to the new mayor of Klaipėda City. And on behalf of Klaipėda City Municipality and of our new mayor, Arvydas Vaitkus, I sincerely welcome you to Klaipėda City. I know that you had an excursion yesterday. I hope you liked our small but very beautiful city with very rich history. And I hope that it's not your last time you're visiting us. So, for the Klaipėda region or the territory of Memel, history changed, as you all know, on 16 February 1923. And to mark the centenary of this event, the Lithuanian Parliament proclaimed 2023 as the year of Klaipėda region. The decision has attracted some attention to this event at the national level, but as we all believe, that significance is not yet sufficiently understood on the national level in Lithuania and, of course, in Europe. We welcome all of your efforts to publish new books, publication, and organization of international discussions about this event of 1923. To my knowledge, on Thursday, the first part of the conference in Vilnius, you dealt with the international significance of this event. The second part today focuses on regions similar to Klaipėda with a historical experience. So, on behalf of the main sponsors of the conference, the Municipality of Klaipėda, I would like to thank the main organizers of the event, the University of Klaipėda, the University of Cambridge, and the Lithuanian Institute of History. As well, I want to thank all of you as the participants for contributing to this conference. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome you. Let me welcome you to Klaipėda. I hope you'll have interesting presentation and inspiring discussion. And we are very, very happy to have you here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We had a little tour of Klaipėda yesterday indeed, and I do not know if a few hours were enough, but I hope that this visit helped the participants to understand Klaipėda and especially what makes its history special in the Lithuanian context. Another person I am very grateful to have come to Klaipėda is Charles Clark. Charles is a former Home Secretary in Tony Blair's government, whose current interest is to promote Baltic studies in Cambridge and in the UK. And I know that Charles would also like to say a few words on behalf of Cambridge. Please, Charles.
Vasilijus, thank you very much indeed. You've already heard the day before yesterday in Vilnius from my colleague Professor Brendan Sims and Donatas Kupciunas. But you're quite right, Vasilijus, to identify the fact that the Centre for Geopolitics at Cambridge is trying to develop a dimension of its work in relation to the Baltic Sea region, of which this particular event today is an important part. We were founded at the beginning of 2021, so we're a very young organisation starting after the COVID pandemic. And the purpose of our activity is to try and get much wider discussion, both in the UK and more widely, about the challenges facing the Baltic Sea region and the UK's relationship to it, which remain very active to this day, despite Brexit as referred to earlier on. And the fact is that what we are trying to do is to organise a number of activities around 3 or 4 themes. Firstly, about the whole Baltic Sea region. Secondly, about the UK relationship with the Baltic Sea region. Thirdly, basing on history, our thesis is that you can't understand the threats of today without understanding the history of what has gone on before. And in particular, our director, Professor Brendan Sims, sitting at the back now, is a very widely renowned historian of Europe and of other areas, and that drive is a central part of what we try and do. Fourthly, we try not to be simply academics alone, but also government, diplomats, politicians, business, NGOs, and so on, because we think that promoting discussion of the type you're referring to here is best when it involves a wide range of different experience and interest. And finally, we want to discuss any question, but always look at its geopolitical implication. So whether it's climate change, energy security, migration, whatever it might be, what is the implication for geopolitics? We've had a whole series of events now which have been very successful, but an important component of our activity is to develop a network of universities in the Baltic Sea region, about 19 or 20 of them at the moment. And I particularly want to pay my thanks to Vasilijus in this context. He was one of the first of the universities in the Baltic Sea region who got involved with our network, contributed to it, and really enabled it to exist. Our expertise on Baltic geopolitical matters in Cambridge is not as great as we hope it will be. We're trying to build into the future. But our relationships with universities like the University of Klaipėda are absolutely essential for our capacity to be able to do that. And the commitment of individuals like Vasilijus has been absolutely central to our ability to be able to do that. So that's why we're delighted to join with the university and the Lithuanian Institute of History to organise this event. We're delighted it's taking place. We congratulate you on what it is about. And I think the references in the other remarks earlier to the work that still has to be done to get wider understanding in all of our countries of the importance of these events 100 years ago is very important. I think I should just finally say that it is, of course, the case that since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February last year, the salience, the interest in the context of this conversation has increased enormously for all the obvious reasons. And I hope that we can contribute to finding good steps forward in relation to that disastrous mission by discussing how we can look at ways of organising things better in the future. So thank you for asking me to say a few words, Vasilijus, and I hope the whole of the rest of the conference goes as well as the first half has done.
Okay, so the official part has come to an end, and now we are going to proceed with the first session today and the fourth session in the program. This will be moderated and headed by Vygantas Vareikis, and please, Vygantas, the floor is yours now.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you have a good evening yesterday, so it's time to work. Our first session here in Klaipėda will start by a presentation of Tomas Balkelis from Lithuanian Institute of History. Its theme, Living by the Border, the Case of the Interwar Vilnius region. I know Tomas personally, and I can say a few words about him. He's a senior research fellow at the Institute of the Lithuanian, at the Lithuanian Institute of History in Vilnius. He received the PhD in history at the University of Toronto, and he worked in various universities in the United Kingdom, also was a postdoctoral research fellow at the University College of Dublin, also worked in the Vilnius University with some programs sponsored by Lithuanian Research Council, and he also is author of numerous of books, articles written in English, Lithuanian, and I can say that he is now a well-known historian of the 19th century of Lithuanian history. So please, Tomas, show your abilities.
Hello, everyone. So, as you can see, my paper started Living by the Border, the case of the interwar Vilnius region. My paper follows the popular premise that space is not only a physical, but also a political, social, and cultural construct. Recently, the study of border making has moved from a concern with formal state frontiers to viewing the borders themselves as dynamic, functional processes. Today, we know that borders are constantly reproduced. They are always constructed by political institutions, media representations, educational systems, or ethnic stereotypes. Different groups of society may have their own perceptions of borders. The recent focus on borders as so-called lived spaces shifted the attention to the social and cultural transformations of borderland populations. So my paper is concerned with the relationship between nation-making and lived experiences of the local population in the so-called Polish-Lithuanian borderland. And as you perfectly know, the region was historically highly multi-ethnic. This is just a very brief illustration, a map from 1914, which shows this very curvy and entangled border between Lithuanians and Slavs. You can see it's a huge mess, if we try to establish exactly where people lived, and to what ethnic group they belonged. So between 1920 and 1939, the region became a hotbed of international conflict between Poland and Lithuania. And this is the Lithuanian map of 1936. Of course, it reflects the kind of the political views of Lithuanians, because the Vilnius region is kind of shown here as almost a part of Lithuania, which in fact it was not at the time. It was part of Poland. So the region, of course, is a site of intense border making. There were never any state boundaries there before 1920. The first demarcation line emerged there as a result of fighting between the Polish and Lithuanian troops in the summer of 1919. The longer-lasting borderline was finalized as a result of truce between Poland and Lithuania signed in late November 1920. The border that cut across eastern Lithuania and split the country into Polish and Lithuanian halves survived only for 20 years. Remarkably, it was also one of the shortest-lived borders in Europe, though I make this claim without really having, a very broad knowledge about all other European borders, but my suspicion is that it was one of the shortest lived. However, the border had a significant political, social, and cultural impact on the local population. So my argument is that although both nation states, Poland and Lithuania, had the ambition to conduct strong-hand policies in the borderland, its local population made their own use of such policies, and I will try to illustrate how it happened. In the initial so-called hot period of the conflict between Poland and Lithuania from 1920 to 23, these policies were based on the use of paramilitary proxies and terror and violence in order to force the locals to accept either Lithuanian or Polish identities. In the later so-called cold period of the conflict, from 24 to 39, both Poland and Lithuania tried to build border security measures and attempted vigorous nationalization campaigns in the area. Remarkably, as I will try to show, the borderlanders, the local people, often circumvented these policies. Although significant groups gave up to the state pressure, others remained politically disloyal, economically subversive, and quite often nationally indifferent. I'm referring here to Taras concept of national indifference. So my focus here will be on the second cold period of the conflict, but let me just go very quickly through the first violent period because it is important to what happens later. So as a result of the Truce of November 1920, which was mediated by the League of Nations, Lithuania becomes divided by a 12-kilometer wide so-called neutral zone. You can see it in the slide. To avoid new clashes, both sides agreed to withdraw their armies, their regular armies, from it. However, in the area not fully controlled by either side, it's kind of no one's land, basically, violence resumes very soon. And what you have there, you have violent agents, Polish and Lithuanian armed proxies fighting each other. So I'm just going to show you very briefly. Here you have so-called the Polish militia on the Polish side, and then you have some photographs here of Lithuanian so-called partisans, the riflemen, who are also sponsored, paid by the Lithuanian army, and so there is a lot of violence here. So each side, they attack each other's villages, kidnap and kill hostages, torture civilians, loot and burn houses. There are attacks against postal offices. Lithuanian riflemen attack landed estates of the Polish landowners. They both sides carry out requisitions, they intimidate local population in order to force them to move out or submit to their authority. I'm not going to go into detail about this, though I wrote about that quite extensively. My major point here is that one of the consequences of the fighting in this neutral zone was that civilians who did not have a clear national identity, for security reasons, I emphasize, were forced to choose one due to the continuous violence and terror. Yet there is an open question whether this violence did contribute indeed to national indifference of some groups of population, though I'm clearly suggesting that actually it did here. So on 3rd February 1923, the League of Nations decided to cancel the neutral zone and to draw an administrative line instead. As we know, the decision was accelerated by the Lithuania's unilateral takeover of the Klaipėda region in January 1923. And I'm moving now to this second part of my presentation. I will talk about securing the border. So the hot and violent period is followed by this cold period of securitization. Two essential features of this period were the attempts by both nation states to turn the former no man's land, the neutral zone, into a sealed and fully secured state border, and to force the locals to accept new rules of living in the borderland. Since May 1923, both sides disbanded the proxies, the paramilitaries. From 1924, the demarcation line was already guarded by Lithuanian and Polish border police troops. The line was long, winding, and confusing, for there were practically no natural boundaries that it could follow. Due to their absence, Lithuanian and Polish border guards were forced to patrol next to each other in open fields and meadows. As a result, constant incidents took place due to illegal border crossings or markings. There was a great confusion on both sides for a number of years, so where exactly the border is. It sounds quite paradoxical, but that was the case. But both sides created an entire border infrastructure. They positioned border guard posts and line crossing points. A 50-meter wide forest zone that separated the states was cut down and fenced. Border guidelines were built every 100 meters, as well as 6 10-meter high wooden poles with brooms attached to the top of them. Here you have a nice look how it looked like. So the primitive infrastructure of the borderline, created in haste and lacking natural boundaries, occasionally raised eyebrows of foreign travelers. This is exactly what happened in June 1933. Some Czech journalists arrived on the scene, and they published some articles ridiculing the Polish-Lithuanian border, saying that this is probably the most primitive border in Europe. They labeled it the straw border because you can see this pole, it is a broom with a piece of straw attached to the top of it. So what is interesting, this pejorative expression of straw border was also widely used by the local population to describe its fake, pitiable, and quite porous character. Yet civilians could cross the border only through border checkpoints that were kept open only during set hours. Here you have a slide of one of these checkpoints. Guards on both sides constantly monitored and controlled those passing by. And the checkpoints were marked with wooden gates. In some places, the border guards had even built decorated gates, as you can see in this case. All these checkpoints were essential for border guards to clarify different misunderstandings, though it was generally forbidden to communicate with the other side. The emergence of the demarcation line disrupted the economic life of the local population. It completely interrupted the trade in the region and destroyed all commercial networks. The new borderline led to the uneven economic development of both parts of Lithuania. So both border guards and locals, they lived quite in tension until the start of World War II. Until 1938, in Lithuania, the martial law remained in the border zone. There were constant shootings at the border and so on, and one of them led to this political crisis in 1938, which led to the Polish ultimatum to interwar Lithuania, and which forced Lithuania to establish diplomatic relations with Poland. And officially, the border was abolished on 10 October 1939, after Lithuania signed the Treaty of Mutual Assistance with the Soviet Union and regained the Vilnius region from the Soviet hands. In January 1940, the border was dismantled completely as the eastern border of Lithuania became the border with the Soviet Union. So I'm trying to move now to the second segment of my paper, to the issue of living by the border. Life on the frontier was not marked by violence alone. During the interwar period, residents constantly moved across the border. Relatives visited each other on the other side. Weddings and funerals took place on both sides. Farmers who owned land across the frontier continued farming. The border was also a site of intense economic life, especially illegal trade. I want to show you, some numbers now. Those are the numbers collected from the official Lithuanian police journal. And as you can see, those are the numbers of persons arrested for smuggling in Lithuania, in all interwar Lithuania. But in the first column, you see that the majority of arrests, they were happening at this Polish-Lithuanian demarcation line. More than 60, 65% occasionally, and you can see that there is an increase actually of these arrests. Well, first of all, these numbers are quite relevant in the sense that it was the longest border that Lithuania had with Poland at the time, but still, I think it shows the amount of massive smuggling that is happening. And here you have another illustration of the same numbers. So the unofficial report from 1924, Lithuanian report, showed that almost half of those who crossed the border were visiting their relatives, but about a third of people who crossed the border were involved in smuggling. And 20% crossed for other purposes, for example, in search of documents and so on. Smugglers from Poland brought footwear, fabrics, and knitwear. From Lithuania, they carried sugar, saccharine, tobacco, and other commodities. The report also concluded that sometimes smugglers helped non-local people to cross the border, but also there were those who crossed the border, I'm quoting here, just for fun, as if playing a game. That was the quote from the report. One of the most visible features of the state building in the area was an attempt to change political cultural identities and political loyalties of the local population. So during the interwar period, those residents of Eastern Lithuania who historically did not have clearly defined national identities came under close state scrutiny and pressure from both sides. Poland and Lithuania conducted active nationalization campaigns that aimed to build their own nationally conscious communities. Here I will focus on the Lithuanian side, bearing in mind that the same research should be done on the Polish side. So in 1934, the Lithuanian army conducted a survey of the borderland population. The survey gloomily concluded that in the border districts, Lithuanization faced serious difficulties. It was slow, uncoordinated, and not sufficiently funded. Most of the agents of Lithuanization were state employees, border guards, clerks, riflemen, teachers, priests who arrived in Kaunas, Lithuania. And the problem was that the locals viewed them as strangers, as agents of the state. The survey showed that at home, those people who had spoken so-called local dialect, poprostu, continued speaking this dialect. Even those young men who have learned Lithuanian in the army from the borderland area, after their return home, they spoke poprostu, or Polish. They refused to join Lithuanian societies, though they considered themselves residents of Lithuania. However, the survey also, one of the conclusions was that actually there is some success, because some people, they already started calling themselves Lithuanians, but the main reason the survey indicated for that was the difference in economic development of both parts of the region. So the Lithuanian side did better economically at the time than the Vilnius region. So the locals tended, to call themselves Lithuanians occasionally. But those are, I think, kind of exceptional cases, because the general conclusion of the survey was that Lithuanization is not working. It has its own limits. So I'm moving now to kind of the final part of my presentation. Just want to show you, some interesting photographs with my brief comments. So what you have here, those living by the border, the local people, also witnessed a new phenomenon that had a deeply symbolic political meaning of marking each other state's national territories. The central and local authorities in Lithuania, and I suspect that in Poland as well, but to a less extent, often organized special excursions to the borderline. School children, members of various patriotic societies, and simply tourists were encouraged to visit the border in order to show their support for state policies and express their patriotism. So you can see in the photograph how people are dressed up, arriving by car, and this is the head of Kaišiadorys postal office with his family, with children, you know, just having an excursion. And here you have children of border guards of the Zarasai district dressed in border guard uniforms. Photograph from 35. And also residents of Salos visit the demarcation line in 1934. I was really impressed how people prepared for these trips, you know, how they were dressed up, you know, and I think, you know, many of these trips took place after a Catholic mass. So you would leave the church and then you would go for a visit to the border. It became like some kind of political, but also cultural ritual. So my time is running short. I just want to give you a very kind of strange and a little bit funny example from the Polish side. So thus, for example, in the summer of 1932, a certain Polish doctor by the name of Holinski organized a summer trip by steamboat from Polish-controlled Druskininkai to the Lithuanian-Polish border. The border was somewhere on the Nemunas, on the Niemen River. The trip attracted a crowd of local Polish tourists, but ended up unexpectedly. Since no one knew where exactly the border on the Nemunas River was, the boat almost ended up on the Lithuanian side. So border guards on both sides suddenly opened fire at the steamboat. And somehow, luckily, the steamboat was reversed and no one was killed. But the tourists were scared. They were shocked, actually, this could happen. So this cultural attraction turned into another violent incident. But my point here is that people really were fascinated by the border, but it was a phantom border, because only the border guards, they knew where exactly it was, not the local ones. So I'm jumping now to my conclusions. My first point is that the interwar Polish-Lithuanian border was one of the weakest and short-lived borderlines in Europe. It was weak because it emerged as a result of warfare in the middle of nowhere. There were very few natural boundaries that could separate both sides. It emerged in the region where it had no historical precedence. It survived only for 20 years. And it was one of the most porous borders due to the massive amount of smuggling. Both states tried to invest into the securitization of the border and engaged in social engineering among the population of borderland. Both aimed to change their political loyalties and identities. However, these strong-hand policies produced negative reactions of the locals that weakened the border-making process. Nationalization campaigns produced only limited results. The living experiences of the locals suggest that they viewed the borderline as disruptive, non-natural, and bogus. Divided families and farms, separated villages and towns, broken parishes, destruction of traditional trading routes, restrictions on movement, and nationalist propaganda campaigns were the main reasons that generated these negative views. And my final sentence, I will try now to connect this to what is happening today in Lithuania. It's just a speculation on my side, but I think one may argue that the impact of interwar border making in the region is felt even today. In Lithuania, there is this recurring debate about the stubborn, recalcitrant regional identity and uncertain political loyalties of the population in the Vilnius region. Or there is this debate about the lack of economic integration of the region. I think, you know, this tension comes from the interwar period. A recent ethnographic survey, by the way, of the Slavic-speaking residents in East Lithuania showed that many of them continue to have negative stereotypes about ethnic Lithuanians as strangers. And the Lithuanian census of 2011, about more than 30,000 people refused to indicate their national identity. I checked, and of those, 17,000 were from the Vilnius region. So I'm just finishing with this open question. Who are those people? Why they became I would say nationally indifferent. So I hope, we will find some of these answers also in other papers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thank you. Questions after? Okay. History is repeating itself. Okay, now let me present another lecturer. Presenter of that session is Krzysztof Buchowski from the University of Białystok. His theme is the conflict over the Sejny region in the years of the 1919-1920. Krzysztof Buchowski is a professor at the Faculty of History and International Relations at the University of Białystok in Poland, and he is working in the history of Central and Eastern Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries and Polish-Lithuanian relation. He is an author of numerous books on Lithuanian-Polish relations, articles published in Polish and Lithuanian language. Please, Krzysztof, take a stage.
Thank you. Good morning. The title of my presentation, The Conflict over the Sejny region in 1919-1920. Today, the Sejny region, after the town of Sejny, is a fragment of the Lithuanian-Polish borderland in the Suwałki region. Today, the name Suwałki region covers the areas in northeastern Poland, covering this area of the present Suwałki, Augustów, and Sejny counties, Polish powiaty. It is worth noting, however, that the term Suwałki region is also used in the Lithuanian tradition. Suwałkia is one of the ethnographic regions of Lithuania located in the southwestern part of the country. The Polish part and the Lithuanian part together form the historic Suwałki region, divided by a border in 1818-1820. The administrative separation of the Suwałki region as Suwałki Governorate within the so-called Congress Kingdom took place under the Russian rule in the 19th century. The Governorate consisted of the following counties: Augustów, Lithuanian Augustavas, Suwałki, Suwałkai, Sejny, Sejnai, Kalwaria, Wilkowiszki, Wilkowiszkis, Mariampol, Mariampole, and Władysławów, currently Kudrykos Naumiestis. On the map of the Congress Kingdom, the area of the Suwałki Governorate had the characteristic shape of a peninsula extended to the north, bounded by the Nemunas River from the east and north, bordering East Prussia in the west. The Lithuanian inhabitants definitely prevailed in the northern counties. Poles dominated in the southern counties, Suwałki and Augustów. Sejny county, powiat sejnyjski, had the most complex nationality structure. 60% of Lithuanians, 20% of Poles, 16% of Jews, 3% of Germans, and 1% of Russians lived there. Poles dominated in numbers only in 2 communities out of 17. Out of 17, and in one community they constituted half of the population. In others, they were in a clear minority. The small town of Sejny had about 3,000 inhabitants. The city was located exactly at the junction of compact areas on the Lithuanian and Polish languages. Jewish and Polish population prevailed in Sejny. However, at the turn of the 20th century, the Catholic seminary operating in Sejny became one of the most important centers of the emerging Lithuanian national movement. Many future political leaders, writers, and scholars passed through the Sejny seminary. A publishing house and a printing house were also established. Without any exaggeration, it can be said that Sejny became a true hotbed of elites, of not only within region, but also through the ethnic Lithuania. The importance of this national center was enormous. Also, the conflict between the Lithuanians and Poles living there arose during this period. Initially, the dispute concerned the language of singing used in churches in the region, but over time it turned into national antagonism. In 1915, Suwałki region was occupied by the German army. The occupiers incorporated this area into a special military administrative unit, the so-called Oberost. Stretching from Kurland through Lithuania to Podlasia and Belarusian lands. In the Suwałki region, the Germans followed the principle of divide et impera, supporting Poles or Lithuanians, depending on their own needs. In mid-November 1918, with the consent of the Germans, the Lithuanians began to create the foundation of state administration. The organs of Lithuanian power were established in areas with the Lithuanian majority, for example, in Punskas, Polish Puńsk, and ethnically mixed ones, for example, in Sejny. But units in the newly emerging Lithuanian army were also introduced to Suwałki, where Poles definitely predominated. At the same time, the German occupiers also agreed to create a Polish civil administration in the counties of Suwałki, Augustów, and Sejny. The arbitrary and cynical nature of German decisions result in the emergency of a dual power. The situation inevitably led to increased tension. In the turn of 1918 and 1918, it became clear that Germany had finally lost the Great War. Sooner or later, the German occupiers also had to retreat from Suwałki region, but for communication reasons, they kept this region under control until the end of August 1918. For several months, they delayed the decision to whom they would ultimately hand over power, increasing distrust between local Poles and Lithuanians, but also contributing to the birth of the conflict between the emerging Polish state and Lithuania. One of the most important problems was the demarcation line of the Polish demarcation of the Polish-Lithuanian border. In the summer of 1919, as the evacuation of the Germans progressed, the Entente powers discussed the provisional demarcation of, among others, in Suwałki region. Initially, the Entente, based on the reports of the French envoy in Lithuania, Colonel Célestin Reboul, decided that almost the entire Suwałki region should be given to Lithuania. But then, under the influence of the persuasion of Polish diplomats, representatives of the superpowers changed their opinion. The so-called the Foch line was drawn, officially proposed by Marshal Ferdinand Foch, in fact prepared by the head of the Polish military mission in Paris, General Tadeusz Rozwadowski. According to this concept, after the evacuation of the German army, Polish power was to remain in Augustów and Suwałki counties. Sejny county was to be divided, with Sejny and Puńsk appointed to Poland. Thus, a few thousand Lithuanians were to remain on the Polish side. However, the Lithuanian government did not want to accept such a solution. It was found unfair. Lithuania was ready to surrender Suwałki, but wanted to keep the areas inhabited by Lithuanians at almost any price. The Prime Minister of the Lithuanian government, Mykolas Sleževičius, therefore called on the Lithuanian inhabitants of Sejny region to resistance against Poland and the decision of the Entente. Military forces were also made stronger. At the same time, the Polish military and political leaders around the head of state, naczelnik państwa, Józef Piłsudski, were thinking about implementing their own plans. They wanted to persuade Lithuania to create a common federal state with Poland. At the beginning of 1918, Vilnius fell under the rule of the Bolsheviks. The Lithuanian government established temporary headquarters in Kaunas. The Polish authorities decided that Vilnius could be a good bargaining chip in relations with Lithuania. In April 1918, the Polish army recaptured Vilnius and pushed the Bolsheviks back. Piłsudski then suggested that Lithuania might regain Vilnius in exchange for renew the union with Poland. However, the Lithuanian authorities remained unwavering. Poland was strongly demanded to recognize the independence of the Lithuanian state and unconditionally return Vilnius. Piłsudski therefore decided to force concession by force. In the summer of 1918, Poles planned a coup in Lithuania. The action was intended to be launched in the regions of the country inhabited by the Polish population. For example, in Suwałki region. The Polish conspiracy was created there. The main goals was to overthrow the Lithuanian government and appoint a new one ready for a political compromise on Polish conditions. At the same time, it was claimed the Lithuanian government opposed the will of the Entente, therefore the intervention was justified. Shortly after the withdrawal of the Germans from Suwałki region, at the end of August 1919, the so-called Sejny uprising broke out. In fact, it was a sabotage operation prepared by the Polish military intelligence. At the last stage, the armed uprising was supported by the regular Polish army. The Poles managed to capture and hold Sejny. However, due to the strong Lithuanian resistance, the territories east of the Foch line could not be taken over. Almost at the same time, the pro-Polish coup in Kaunas was pacified by the Lithuanian forces. However, Lithuanian independence was still under threat. Therefore, the Lithuanian authorities finally decided that an armistice and demarcation along the Foch line in Suwałki region should be agreed to. The Lithuanian army did not continue the attempt to recapture Sejny. This solution was then suggested by the English diplomacy, offering the Lithuanian support in return of Vilnius. The proposal seemed worth considering, especially since the proposed demarcation was still temporary. The national affiliation of Sejny region was still not determined. Neither Lithuania nor Poland treated the settlement as final. Poland vigorously consolidated its role in Sejny and tried to create a fait accompli. In the autumn of 1919, the Catholic seminary was removed from the city and the liquidation of Lithuanian institution began. At the same time, it was constantly emphasized that the best solution to the Polish-Lithuanian conflict would to be creation of a common state or the incorporation of Lithuania into Poland. Lithuania, on the other hand, officially put forward territorial claims not only to Vilnius but also to Suwałki region. The government in Kaunas was waiting for an appropriate moment to claim at least Sejny. In the summer of 1920, Polish-Lithuanian relations became complicated again. The Polish-Bolshevik war escalated. As a result of the Bolshevik offensive, the Polish army left Vilnius region and southern part of Suwałki region. The Bolsheviks entered Vilnius, but the Red Army, advancing from Grodno, Gardinas, did not cross the Augustów Channel and therefore did not enter Suwałki region. Lithuania officially remained neutral. However, under the Lithuanian-Soviet peace treaty concluded on July the 12th, Lithuania was to receive Vilnius region. Although this agreement did not determine the future of Suwałki region, the Lithuanian authorities decided to seize the opportunity. They decided to militarily claim the territories they considered disputed with the Poles. The Lithuanian elites decided that the recovery of Vilnius and Sejny was at least as important as the independence of the state. There are many indications that the Bolsheviks, after the expected fall of Poland, intended to establish their power, among others in the Baltic states. On July the 19th, the Lithuanian army occupied Sejny, and on July the 30th entered Suwałki. The Lithuanian authorities behaved differently in these cities. The Polish municipal administration remained in Suwałki. Lithuanians limited to the establishment of the military headquarters. It was expected that the Lithuanian presence in this city would be temporary. In Sejny, on the other hand, the county administration was immediately restored and the traces of Polish rule were erased. The desire to permanently hold this region was manifested. In mid-August 1920, the Polish army defeated the Bolsheviks in the Battle of Warsaw and launched a counter-offensive. Only after the defeat in the Battle of Warsaw, a month after the conclusion of the Bolshevik-Lithuanian Treaty, did the Bolsheviks hand over Vilnius to Lithuania. In September 1920, in the area of Sejny, fighting broke out between the Lithuanian army and the Polish army trying to reoccupy the Foch line. Just like a year earlier, the Lithuanians were willing to give up almost the entire occupied area, but they did not intend to give up Sejny county. The city of Sejny changed hands several times. As the Polish historian Piotr Łosowski counted, in a period of little more than a year and a half, the administration in Sejny changed as many as 13 times. It was not until the end of September that Poles finally rejected the Lithuanian army behind the Foch line. The Polish troops, preparing to that time for the decisive battle with the Bolsheviks on the Nemunas River, temporarily also violated indisputably Lithuanian territory. At the turn of September and October 1920, talks on armistice started in Suwałki. It was established, among other, respecting the Foch line in the area of Sejny, as well as establish a neutral zone. In practice, the Polish side then also agreed to the Lithuanian rule over Vilnius. However, as it soon turned out, the Polish side had other plans for Vilnius. Next day, after the conclusion of the Suwałki agreement, General Lucian Żeligowski began to act of Józef Piłsudski orders. In fact, Piłsudski once again wanted to force Lithuania to establish a union with Poland. However, history turned out differently. Żeligowski's action opened a completely new stage in Lithuanian-Polish relations, especially regarding Vilnius region. The decision issued by the powers in 1919 and then confirmed in the Suwałki Agreement in 1920 turned out to be permanent in Sejny region. The course of the borderline was approved by the Conference of Ambassadors in 1923. Despite the political turmoil, neither Poland and Lithuania officially questioned the demarcation in the Suwałki region anymore. The Foch line in this section marks the state border till this day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Krzysztof. Okay, we still have a few minutes, 7 minutes for questions, and if we have questions from the auditory here, please, we are waiting. Not me, but presenters.
Thank you. I thought these were wonderful presentations, and I was really struck by the image of border guards basically patrolling next to each other on open fields without really knowing where the border is in the Vilnius region. That was really a striking image, I thought. I was wondering if you could both say a bit more about the impact that this had on societies, also maybe in the long term across the interwar period. Thomas, you mentioned, for instance, that people crossed the border sometimes after Mass, but I suppose that there were also villages that were cut off from their churches through the border, and also trade routes, of course, were severed, and railway lines were severed. And I was wondering if you could say a bit more about how that, or the impact that had on society in the Vilnius region, but also, and in the Sejny region. And one quick other question concerns, that's probably more for Thomas, the concept of national indifference. And in a sense, Terrazara's idea was that the predominant image had always been that imperialism was the historical force that marginalized national identities, and that national identities were in a sense the natural status quo. And Terrazara said, no, it was the other way around. There was rather national indifference is the natural status quo, and then nationalism comes as the historical force that then forces people to conceive of themselves as having a national identity. And I was wondering how far you think that that's actually the case in the Vilnius region? I mean, were they nationalized as part of border making? Or, as you also suggested, did national indifference just continue to be the mode through which people identified themselves? And also maybe a bit about what did that actually mean? What was that regional identity? What was specific about that?
Yes, please, Thomas.
So thank you, Klaus, for the questions. Impact on societies, I would make a distinction, between the impact on the local people who lived, just across the border or in the area of Borderland, and the impact that it made on on the national scale in both states. My impression is that, for example, in interwar Lithuania, there was not really a lot of news and a lot of knowledge about what was happening in the Borderland area, except violent incidents. This was described, very widely in national press. How a Polish security guard, border guard, shot a Lithuanian border guard, and so on and so on. So violence is always kind of the subject of the national news, but there are very few articles, that speak about the local people there. There are some materials, that describe the life of border guards, how difficult they found places to rent, how separated they were from their families, from their wives and children who stayed in Kaunas and some other cities, and now they had to live and work in this half strange, hostile environment. So, this is kind of the narrative that is shown in the national press. Now, talking about the impact about the local, on the local level, it's a major topic, and I just showed you, just some fragments. But yes, there is a lot of disruption. Definitely, as I mentioned, broken parishes and so on. But also, at the same time, there is a constant movement across the border. For example, I come from this Varėna town, which is not far away from Druskininkai, southern Lithuania. So Varėna was divided into two parts. There was a Merkys river in the middle of the town. There was one side of the town, the other side of the town. So people from the Lithuanian part of Varėna, they owned the land on the Polish side. So they would get these written permissions to cross the border, and they would do it constantly. People even would go for mushroom picking on the other side. And it seems to me, on the national level, there was this discourse about hostility between the border guards, the constant shootings and so on. But on the local level, there was a lot of kind of negotiations between the locals and border guards. And in most of the cases, it was peaceful negotiation. They would, the border guards, they would know the locals, and they would allow them to cross the border, to pick up, your cow that is on the other side, to get some grass, cut, on their side in the meadow, to go for mushroom picking and so on. So there is a lot of this kind of gray zone between the state structure and the local population. At the same time, as I mentioned, you have a massive amount of smuggling. And I didn't mention in the paper, but I discovered that about 1/3 of Lithuanian border guards until 1924, they were fired by the central authorities because of their involvement in smuggling. So there was a lot of wheeling and dealing between the locals and border guards. Another, I think, point to support this argument that the border is there, but it's not functioning properly because it's such a new construct. It's still not in the minds of the people. So your second question was, were they nationalized as part of kind of border making? Yes and no. Yeah, as I was trying to say, there were several kind of campaigns of nationalization, and the first one was the most brutal one. I briefly talked about this kind of violent period and what was happening in this neutral zone. And this is really, I was shocked, by the levels of violence. The violence that included really gruesome things like mutilations of bodies, torturing, hostage taking, a lot of burning of, each other estates. And what is critical about this is that civilians are being involved in this. It's the proxies, and these proxies are formed from the local population as well. So these Lithuanian riflemen from Perloja, they were farmers. They would farm their plots of land, during daytime. In the evening, they would pick up their guns and they would go, hunting on the other side. And I know there was this so-called Vareikis village, which was on the Polish side, and it had very strong Polish militia unit. And those people, they would do the same on the Lithuanian side. They would go hunting. They would collect ransom from about 20 villages, of Lithuanian-speaking villages in the area. My point here is, when you have a situation like that, and you have those people who are still undecided about national identity, I think, they are forcefully nationalized. They have to pick up some identity just for security reasons. Now, to what extent this identity is artificial, forced by circumstances, that's a good question. And probably I would use this notion of kind of a hybrid or situational identity that Vasilijus was using in his work. Just accepting, the argument of the strong side and saying, well, if Lithuanian soldiers would come, if I'm a local person, I would say, if they ask me who I am, I would say, yes, I am Lithuanian, but if the Polish side comes, I would say, yes, of course, I'm Polish. Just leave me alone, I can be anything that you want. So this one part, this violence and identities, and I'm trying to also show that these nationalization campaigns, they were limited, they did not achieve kind of full success, but they made quite an impact. There was some information coming from central authorities that to a certain extent this opening of Lithuanian schools, for example, in the Borderland area, sending, patriotically oriented Catholic priests helped to nationalize the population. But the fact, that this region until today has a lot of number of people who still consider themselves tuteishi, meaning the locals, I think it tells me clearly that it didn't work, very successfully. So it happened on certain levels, but it did not succeed, And that's a very interesting question. Why? Because now we're talking about contemporary politics. What was the last question? What was the last question that you gave? Okay. So
national and different.
National difference. Regional identity, yeah. So, yeah.
I'm afraid the questions is over, but